Hi, my name's Andrew, this is my van Morpheus, and today we're going to be installing 2 rear door windows to let in some gorgeous oceanside views for van life. But for now, mostly the backyard. Last video I kicked off my Ford Transit build by installing a massive cargo door window. But although the view was great, the solar tint definitely limited the amount of light that was able to get into the van. So I figured installing 2 rear windows would brighten things up even more, and FYI, if you want to follow along, I put a link down below to a written guide with a list of all the tools I'll be using. Finally, before starting the install, it's a good idea to pick a day where it's going to be dry for at least 24 to 48 hours before finishing. And the ideal setup is to have someone experienced helping you, but I actually found the cargo window pretty easy to install on my own with proper safety precautions, so we're going to be flying solo this time too. If you've never installed a van window before, then it's a good idea to deal with any potential distractions beforehand and take some deep breaths so you don't feel rushed and get pressured into taking shortcuts. For starters, I used a marker and a straight edge to make a dotted outline all the way around both window frames, following the outside ridge of the cutout, and using rubbing alcohol to clean up any mistakes. Unfortunately, the Ford Transit 2022 has this weird notch at the bottom, so I spaced my dots going up from that area around 1.5 inches away from the door's edge, and then curved them in by hand so they gradually ran into the top corner of the cutout frame. Next, I used the dots to drill marking holes every inch or so around the perimeter using a thin metal bit, which was easier and faster, but it did break a couple times. So for the second door, I used a 1/4 inch bit, which was a little bit slower but way more durable. After that, I moved to the outside, connected the dots with a marker, and then started cutting the door with a jigsaw, moving up from the bottom, adding some painter's tape for security as I went, and then switching over to the other side so that I was left with a small section at the top to finish. Not bad. Got a very nice view of the backyard. It's not very scenic, but it's a start. Having worked both ways now, I definitely prefer cutting from the outside because there's just way more room. And the jigsaw is a lot easier to use with the guide on versus taking it off to fit in tight corners. Not wanting to leave jagged exposed metal, I smoothed the edge down with a die grinder and sanding disc, blew any stray shards out of the crack with a shop vacuum. FYI, compressed air can also works. And then picked up the floor debris with a HEPA filter vacuum, and wiped the window frame down with rubbing alcohol, which I let dry for a few minutes, and then covered the raw metal with a bit of rust paint using a foam brush. Some people put the rubber trim on immediately, but I found it better to let the paint dry for 2 to 5 hours and then come back to it later after I was done installing the windows. Before moving on, I dry tested the windows with suction grips to make sure they fit, and then checked the weather one more time because there's no going back after the next part. Having confirmed the fit, I wiped both the outer van metal and windows with a cloth, and then cleaned each one of them with rubbing alcohol around the perimeter where they were going to bond, and then applied a thin layer of adhesive primer with a dauber to both surfaces, leaving a 1/2 inch gap or so on each side and allowing it to dry for a full hour. After that, I laid down the adhesive with a caulking gun and a thick Tootsie Roll size 1/2 inch bead around the outer edge of the window, leaving a 1/2 inch gap and making sure to overlap every time I stopped. The key is to keep the bead size as consistent as possible, and I would definitely err on putting too much adhesive rather than not enough. Using the vacuum grips, I lined up the window with the opening, bracing myself on the stepladder for support and making sure not to touch the adhesive until I had it centered. At which point I pressed in gently, only making small adjustments so as not to smear the adhesive, and then used a free hand to attach the tape to the van for extra security. With the window positioned, I used my palms to gently press around until the edges lined up evenly with the rim of the van metal, leaving around 1/4 inch or so of space for airflow. Finally, I added more pieces of painter's tape to each side, attached a suction grip to the center of each window, and then braced a couple tall objects under the grips to apply light pressure and prevent the windows from slipping down before the adhesive dried. FYI, you want to apply pressure slowly because pushing the window too far in and having to pull it out could ruin the seal. After 3 to 4 hours, the van was technically okay to drive, but just to be safe, I left the van parked in the driveway and tied a makeshift tarp tent over the roof to protect the windows from rain, which kept them dry for a full 72 hours until I did the final leak test with a garden hose. Overall, cutting the rear door windows in my Ford Transit was definitely easier than dealing with the massive cargo door window. And now I can move on to adding some vented side windows, which I'll post about in the next week or so. But all that said, if you'd like to support the channel, you can shop the referral links down below, watch my van life day 1 video to see what it's like moving into a Ford Transit for the first time, or subscribe to see more van life adventures. Finally, if you have a question about installing bonded windows, or about van life in general, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, catch you next time, peace!